Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. I am so excited today to introduce my next guest, Martha Buttenheim, who's actually the first guest we've ever had who was a college classmate of mine. Now, as most people do, or certainly in those days, in the days before social media and Facebook, we lost touch after college. But eventually we reconnected through Facebook. And over the years, I had heard that she married her college sweetheart and had 4 beautiful children. But I didn't see her again in person until our 25th college reunion. And she introduced me to her female companion as her partner. So I, of course, said business partner or partner. And I don't even know why I said that, because last I had heard she was married to a guy who I knew in college. But I guess that was my usual response whenever anybody introduced me to somebody as their partner. And she said both. Now, as a fairly typical straight person who considers myself very open-minded and an ally, I wanted to know more about how that worked out. I also knew about 4 other women in my age group who were previously married to men and now divorced, but in happily committed relationships with women. In a previous episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica, we talked to psychologist Dr. Drema Dial about how she figured out she was a lesbian after her own divorce briefly in episode 29, where we were really talking about the psychosocial causes of migraine. But I thought this topic was worth a much deeper dive, especially after our interview with Vivian Fransen in episode 56 about her book, The Straight Spouse. So before I get into it with Martha, let me tell you a little bit about her background professionally. She's the owner of Guidelight Coaching. And as an executive coach, she works with executive level women and entrepreneurs to help them achieve their goals, perform at their peak, and manage work-life balance with minimal stress, striving, and sacrifice. Before becoming a coach, Martha was an entrepreneur herself, and she and her partner built a successful upscale retail and wholesale jewelry component business with 2 retail locations. She sourced inventory for the stores far and wide, traveling to Hong Kong, Thailand, and Indonesia. And after selling the business, Martha still keeps her hand in jewelry design by establishing Buttenheim Studio, where she creates bespoke jewelry pieces for private clients. Martha lives in Hartford, Connecticut with her wife, Pam, and is the mother of 4 children and stepmother to 2 more. Welcome to the ladies' room.
Hi, thanks. I'm so excited.
Yay. Is this your first time doing an interview in a ladies' room?
It definitely is my first time. So, but I'm psyched.
Yay.
It's so fun to be with you.
Oh, it's always great to talk to you. And I'm so glad we were connected, and I'm so glad you were available to do this. But first, I always ask everybody what their most unique, interesting, different, or exciting experience is that they ever had in a ladies' room. And I know you told me you didn't want to answer that question. No, that makes me want to ask it even more.
Even more.
So it's just you and me. Just, we share everything.
All right. I'll just tell you parts of it.
Okay.
Nothing happened. But it involved the ante room to the ladies' room at Studio 54.
Ooh.
It was after Studio 4 was, no longer really Studio 54 anymore, not like you and I knew it in the 70s. So I think it was the early aughts, and we were there for a concert, and it involved a red thong and leather pants.
Okay, now I need to hear more.
Was
it your red thong and leather pants or somebody else's red thong and leather?
Somebody else's, and they were really risky because that was the door. I mean, there was an open door and people were walking through the anteroom. You know how they have, mirrors and chaise longue and that sort of, I don't think they had chaise longue at Studio 54, but that sort of a room, the lounge, the women's lounge. And so people could technically be coming and going, and I got mooned. Let's just put it that way.
Okay, so it was just one person soloing
Yes,
in their
and I thought it was very risky, and it came with an over-the-shoulder look, and it was hysterical, and it still makes me embarrassed to this day.
Oh,
It's just so funny. It was just so funny.
we've heard much more embarrassing stories
I
in
know.
the ladies' room. And this is, in all seriousness, this is what I always advise people to when they're talking to their doctors. I usually say, yeah, there's really not much we haven't heard.
I've heard way worse. Yeah.
After doing over 60 episodes of In the Ladies' Room podcast, we have heard all kinds of stories about all kinds of things people have walked in on other women doing in the ladies' room. So that's relatively tame.
Yeah. Well, it was better than running into my cousin on the New Jersey Turnpike in a ladies' room. You know, out of nowhere. Just, Debbie, is that you? You know,
that's a good story.
Oh, no, that's not nearly as good as the Studio 54 one.
And we talk about everything in the ladies' room. So what I want to talk to you about is, how did you go from being married to a man with 4 children to showing up at your college reunion with your partner?
Well, it's so weird because, you know, I think I'm just as surprised as everybody else. I definitely grew up, you know, straight as an arrow as far as I knew. And I didn't have any brothers, so boys were fascinating. I had older male cousins. They were fascinating. And I always had crushes on boys. I can tell you all the names of them all through grammar school. I loved boys. And so I married my college sweetheart, and he was my college sweetheart, and we had 20 wonderful years, and sex was great. I mean, but the problem was I was lonely in my marriage. And I'd always had a lot of close women friends because I've got 3 sisters. I love women, and I love my friendships with women. And I'd always had, in addition to my close relationships to my sisters, I'd always had good women friends. And I never had feelings for any of them, not like that, never. And so what happened was but my marriage had some holes in it. And over the years, as we had more children, and as he had more stress, and as he became, you know, more, it was a struggle to stay connected. I was lonely, and it was chronic, and it was doing damage long term. And I was in kind of denial about that, because in my family, you know, you get married, you stay married forever. My parents my mom just died, but they were married for 70 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And
when you say lonely, were you emotionally lonely or physically lonely?
Emotionally lonely.
Was he traveling a lot for business and physically away?
He traveled a lot. He came home late all the time. I was the 24/7 mom. There was nothing ostensibly wrong. It's just, he's an adult child of an alcoholic. And I think his work became his ism. And I just couldn't get him, and he was not able to, he wasn't able to do some of the things I just asked him to do, which was to be home more. Could we do it, you know, could we have family dinner this number of times a week or twice a week, or could we do it on Sunday night? And it was always difficult. And, you know, I don't 100% know why. I'm sure I had my part in it, in some way, that maybe I didn't speak up enough or often enough or whatever, but little by little, you know, I kind of started withdrawing emotionally from the marriage because I was lonely, and I was looking to friends, and trying to accept the way things were, and accommodate the way things were. He was a great dad on the weekends, that sort of thing, but he did travel a lot. He was gone. I mean, you know, there were a lot of good things too. I don't mean to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I was lonely, low grade, long-term lonely.
Yeah. I never told you this, but I actually ran into him on a plane one time.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh my God, how weird.
I traveled a lot too.
Did you recognize him? Did he recognize
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
What a riot. What a
Absolutely.
riot. Anyway, well.
For those of you who didn't know Martha's husband, he was very distinctive looking. And I mean
Yeah.
that in a really good way.
Yeah, he was, well, yes, he is distinctive looking. And so anyway, there we are. And my kids at this point are, when I met Pam, her husband introduced us at church. And this was a funny part of the story. I was at that point on the vestry of an Episcopal church, and I was on the, I was heading the parish life committee and the parish life committee. So I was like Miss Hospitality. So I saw this couple come in that I didn't know with their two little kids, and I am outgoing, and I go up to them and I say, "Oh, where are you from?" Well, they had just moved from Hong Kong, yada yada. But actually, I was only talking to him. And so I guess I had this nice chat with him, and they got in their car to leave. And as they were coming around, he saw me and he said, Pam, get out of the car and go talk to that woman. She's your kind of person.
Okay, apparently.
So yes, I was. And of course, I'm on television, so FedEx has to come. But hush, Mercy, hush. I'm sorry. Now that I know, Mercy, thank you. Lie down. Now that I know Pam as well as I do, he must have had to take a pitchfork to get her to get out of the car, because she's very introverted.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I would not have been able to get her to get out of a car to go meet somebody like that. She just would have said, no, let's just go. But he got her to get out of the car, and she came over and we chatted, and she got back into the car, and he said, so what'd you think? And she said, well, she seems kind of like the kind of person who sips iced tea by the side of the pool at the country club. That was pretty offensive. I'm glad I didn't know that till later. Anyway, we became friends, and we were good friends for a while in our social group. And then she found out she was going to move to Atlanta. So I kind of was like, oh, well, that was short-lived. But then all of a sudden she wasn't going to move to Atlanta. And so at that point we got to be better friends. And our two little boys were the same age. So, and we were going to the same church. So, and I don't know what it was. Oh, I know what happened next. Well, she knew that my sister had been in a 20-year marriage and was living with a woman. So she knew my sister was gay. I don't know if my sister labels herself as gay, and that's something I want to talk about too. The whole
Absolutely, that's a big part of this.
I don't like labels. But so she knew that my sister was gay. So she felt safe enough to tell me that she thought she was gay. And she's from Arkansas and very conservative family. And she had really never told anybody about that before. Maybe a few people, but they were at a distance. And so she took a risk telling me from her point of view. It was scary for her to tell me. So after that, we got closer.
Well, I don't want to interrupt, but everybody's dying to know. Did she tell you why she thought she was gay? Or did she indicate to you at that point that she had any kind of feelings towards you?
No, it was nothing at that point to do with me. She'd felt that she was gay since she was a little girl.
Okay.
I mean, she'd been struggling with this her whole life.
And how did you react when you heard that? Were you surprised?
Well, I was sympathetic. No, I wasn't terribly surprised. I was sympathetic because I was like, geez, that really sucks because you're married and you've got these two kids, and that's what a prison, So I just felt sympathy, and I listened, and we got to be closer friends. And she was pretty unhappy at that point in her marriage, and she also was somebody who had been mommy tracked. Mm-hmm. She has a special needs son, and she's a very high-powered person, and she was frustrated. So she decided to go back and start a business. They went on vacation to Bali, and she got this idea for a business, a jewelry business. We were getting closer and closer. And I remember that when she went on her first business trip, that was one of maybe my first inklings. I missed her. I missed her, and her mother was babysitting, and I remember seeing her mother in church, and her mother has the same cheekbones, and I remember feeling wistful that she wasn't there. So something was already happening. I mean, you remember this stuff later. And then that spring, I started to have inklings, and I think she was starting to have inklings, but nobody talked. And then she needed somebody to go with her on her second business trip. And so she invited me, and which was really impractical. I mean, my oldest son was that year going into, let's see, 10th or 11th grade. He would be going into 11th grade, or maybe senior, it doesn't matter. My youngest was in kindergarten, and I had two in the middle. So it was complicated, but my husband agreed to it. Somehow we patched it together, and I went to Asia with her for 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
And I was terrified. I mean, to me, and we actually had a discussion about this. To me, this was as irresponsible, I thought, as Sally Ride getting in the, no, it wasn't Sally Ride. Who was it?
Sally Ride was the astronaut.
Yeah, the woman who got killed in Challenger. I remember.
Yeah, that was Sally Ride.
It was Sally Ride. I thought it was with the school teacher. Oh, it doesn't.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Sally Ride is the astronaut. The school teacher is the one who was
school
killed.
teacher. And I remember thinking, oh my God, how can she take that risk? She still has young children at home, right? So in my mind, going to Asia, that's how big a deal it was. That's how much of a, I was a stay-at-home mother, very, pretty old-fashioned. So I go on this trip. Nothing happened, but I was worried before we left. And I remember saying to my sister, I sort of feel like I have feelings for her, and I'm really uncomfortable, and blah, blah, blah.
You said this is a gay sister or one of your other sisters?
No, different sister. And she said, oh, don't worry, you're just nervous about the trip. And so we went on the trip. We had a wonderful time. We were, hip to hip for 2.5 weeks, and nothing.
Separate bedrooms or separate beds?
Separate beds. Nothing happened. I mean, no acknowledgement of anything, but we were definitely, had been getting closer and closer. And I think both of us individually had feelings, but we were totally not going to ever talk about that. So we went through the whole trip. And what happened is, when we came home, I will never forget, we arrived at Newark Airport, I think. Maybe it was Kennedy, doesn't matter. And Vitas was picking us up.
Your husband.
My ex-husband, who I shouldn't have named, but I did. Anyway, and he brought us each a flower, which was very sweet. Aww. But I remember as he was greeting me, she was at a distance, and she looked very bereft or something, and I had this stabbing feeling. And then we all got in the car, and he got on the phone, because
that's what he does.
That's what he does. And I was in the front seat with him, and I'm like, screw this. I climbed into the back seat to be with her. And everything had shifted, and we both went to our separate houses, and it was open house for the schools, and I was getting information from my ex-husband, from my husband about, well, you got to be at Middlebrook at this time and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, this is a role reversal. He's telling me what to do. So we had to, with our jet lag, go to all our kids' classrooms and everything. And we kept calling each other. And we were like, what are you doing? What do you eat? What'd you have for lunch? It was ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And then about 3 weeks, well, no, not even 3 weeks. A couple weeks later, 9/11 happened. And I think that changed the world for lots of people, right? It was part of our story. And of course, we were I don't think I was the first person she called, because her husband was down in New York. So she was afraid for him. But we really wanted to talk. And within 2 weeks, I just couldn't stop thinking about her. And what happened was, she was having a really hard time in her marriage, and I kept bringing her food. I would make her homemade ice cream, and I would make her homemade black rice pudding, which we'd eaten in Asia. And I would drive up the 4 miles to her house and ring the doorbell, and I would give her food. And it was like, what is up with this? I can't stop thinking about this woman, right? It's very strange. And finally, there was a night where I finally said to her, I can't stop thinking about you. And she said, I can't stop thinking about you either. And from then on, it was just, there was no going back. There was no going back. We were really crazy in love. And I mean, like, as if we were taking crazy pills, because I think we were thinking we were being so careful and secretive and that nobody could possibly know. And I think we were oozing it all over the place and probably being careless and stupid. But, you know, then our lives blew up. Because I am not capable of living, you know, in secrecy like that. I'm just not built that way. So I tried to live with this strange thing of, here I am. You know, it's hugely important to me to be monogamous in your relationship, and here I am having an affair. You know, it was like,
so you skipped a little part. You went from, we said we were crazy about each other, to then saying you were having an affair. So when did physical stuff happen in this whole?
Pretty much right away. Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm not her first, but she was my first. And so that was, you know, that's a whole new ball game. But sex is learned as well as natural, right? So I mean, you just figure all this stuff out. And there was certainly more novelty to it. You know, it's like, whoa, this is really new.
So how did that compare to the first time you were with a man?
Oh, well, the first time I was ever with a man was in a dorm room, and I was so stupid. Monica, you'll love this story. Okay, I'm really embarrassed to tell people this, but I was so stupid that I was a freshman. Mm-hmm. I was so stupid that after he was finished, because of course nothing happened for me.
Right.
I said, "Did you use a condom?"
Afterwards. Like, and what was the answer?
It was kind of like, I think he thought, what is the IQ of this woman that I'm with? You know, but that's how inexperienced I was. I was like, oh, somehow the guy somehow slips on a condom. I mean, so my first time with a guy was, you know, I was a baby, mm-hmm. and very innocent. And no, I mean, you know, you're an adult. I'm an adult now having sex. And so it's totally different.
But that was a big transition, going from, first of all, being married for 100 years.
That was the biggest transition.
And so the first thing is having an extramarital liaison.
That was one of the hardest, most awful parts, because that was so out of my integrity, you know. And I remember I kept saying to Pam, I'm going to hell, I'm going to hell. I don't even believe in hell, but I kept saying, I'm going to hell, I'm going to hell. The guilt was so horrible. And that was the beginning of the one of the awfuls. That was awful. And then after I told my husband, I didn't feel as pressured about that, because I basically said, I want a divorce. I mean, I knew so quickly that I was in absolute deep with her. I just knew. I knew it down to my toes.
Well, you knew you were in deep, but you also knew that your marriage was not fulfilling anymore.
Right. And I knew that I could not live without her. I knew that. I knew we were kind of destined to be together. That sounds so corny, but it was.
Love is corny.
What? It is
Love is corny.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is corny. But
have you ever listened to a country music song?
I know. I love country music now. It's for middle-aged people, country music. But it was such a strong feeling of knowing that it enabled me to go through all the horrible things that were required. And it was a lot of years of horrible.
So how much time was there between the time you consummated this relationship with Pam and when you told your then husband that you wanted a divorce?
It was about 2 months, because it was, there was 9/11 and a couple of weeks later. So it was end of September, about the end of September that we became, consummated. That's such an old-fashioned word. And then
it's a medical term.
Yeah, it kind of is. And then it was Thanksgiving Day that I told my husband, because he'd been asking me. I hadn't been able to say it. He knew something was wrong. I mean, he knew me. And I finally told him on Thanksgiving Day, because he confronted me, and there was just kind of nowhere to go, nowhere to hide.
He confronted you by saying what's going on, or are you having an affair?
I think he said, what's going on with Pam? And I said, I'm in love. I said, I'm in love with her. And he said, of course you are.
Oh.
I mean, he knew. I think everybody knew. It was, we thought it didn't show. If we just keep going to the grocery store and taking care of our children, no one will notice. But we were taking crazy pills. So he knew, but he was furious. And I went through a couple of weeks where I thought I had to give her up, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Because he threatened for me to take the children.
Mm. And at that time, politically, was that a reasonable thing?
It just scared me. I don't think that was possible even then, but it scared me. He was.
And did you consult a lawyer?
Yes, I did. And I think that's when I found out. I did go to a lawyer. But the whole thing scared me. I was like, I'm going to lose my children. Even I wasn't sure what he could do. And he was speaking out of anger. But it worked.
And what part do you think he was most furious about? That you wanted a divorce, or that you were no longer in love with him, or that you were in love with somebody else, or that you were in love with a woman?
I think that he just saw his life falling apart. I think he just saw his life falling apart, and there was nothing he could do. And he wanted to be able to control it, and there was nothing he could do. But he was horribly hurt. The whole thing, and this is a question I still don't understand. If I'd been married to him and he left me for a man, I would have been angry about the marriage falling apart. I would have been angry about my life changing. But I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I would have been more upset if he'd left me for a woman than a man. Because I sort of feel like, he likes guys. I can't compete with that.
Right.
But if it had been a woman, I would have been like, well, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? So, but guys have told me repeatedly that's not the way men feel. That they feel weenie whacked in some way. In some way that you have really disregarded and dismissed their manhood in some way.
Well, I think the idea is you're saying he's not enough for you.
Yeah.
And men often bring that issue back to their masculinity.
Yeah.
So even though what you originally said was the hole in your relationship predated meeting Pam.
Oh, yeah.
And that you were emotionally lonely.
Right.
And so for you, it was about emotional fulfillment.
Totally.
And, sex happened when it happened.
Right.
But for him, it's about his masculinity, and it's about sex, and it's about sexuality. But I think the bottom line is none of us can ever know how we would feel in a certain situation.
Exactly.
Try changing the microphone because we're getting an echo. Can you hear me?
I can.
That didn't help. Okay.
You hear? I'm not hearing an echo.
Okay. So I think none of us can ever know how we would feel in any other given situation. And I think this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because, you know, I was feeling as a straight woman, having talked to you and having to talk to 4 other women friends of mine who were in very similar situations. And then hearing about this, I don't know if this is a middle-age thing or if this is just represents the fluidity of our sexual orientation, you know, when, about the theory that dates back to the 1950s, that sexuality is not necessarily a binary choice. You know, we can have different feelings at different times or different attraction to different people. I have one friend who was in a very similar situation to yours, and this gets, jumping into that issue about labels. She doesn't see herself as a lesbian. She was married to a man. It wasn't fulfilling in most parameters. She met a woman, fell in love, and is in a sexual and emotional relationship with a woman. And she just feels like she happened to fall in love with that person.
I feel exactly the same way. Sex was not the issue in my marriage. If I had been emotionally less lonely, I'd still be married probably, as far as I know. That wasn't the issue. I do think it's funny, our mutual friend Jessica, she told me that when she told her mother about me, that this was 15 years ago, this all happened 17 years ago, so I think it must have been about then. Her mother was like, "Oh yeah, women do that all the time." Which I thought was really funny.
And that's what we're hearing about. And I think that, probably in her mother's generation, that was something women continued to do on the sly and didn't necessarily get divorced over it, or may have gotten divorced, but certainly not remarried.
Right.
So maybe that's the thing that has changed, is that what's changed culturally is now people can just be out about who they're loving.
Right.
And those of us who
last a long time. I mean, my mother sure didn't have Jessica's mother's reaction. My mother was furious at me, and I told her I was lonely in my marriage, and she said, "Well, go spend more time with your friends."
I did that, Mom, and look what happened. But that's interesting that your mother was furious, even though your sister was already in a relationship with a woman. So was she more furious about the divorce, or was she more furious about you being in a relationship with a woman?
That's a good question. It would have been enough that she was furious about the divorce. Even if I hadn't told her about Pam, I think she would have been furious I was getting a divorce. And I was lucky. I mean, I already had a sister who, blazed this trail for me.
Had your sister been married first to a man?
Yeah, my sister was married for 20 years and had
she had children?
Yeah, 2 children. And she ended up having a relationship with somebody for a few years. And now she's been, after her divorce, there was no overlap there. And then now she's been in a long-term relationship with somebody for, I think about 12 years or something. But, I was lucky, but my poor parents are like, "Oh my God, we've got 4 daughters and 2 of them are in love with women. How,
So, and that may be another element. They may be thinking, what did we do wrong? Or what did we do to put our daughters in this situation? And obviously you've already shared there are people who really valued longevity of marriage.
Yes. Yeah. And, I think there's possibly a genetic component to this. 2 of my 4 children are in same-sex relationships. Go figure. I had an aunt who was definitely a lesbian. I don't know, and like I said, I don't like to use the word lesbian. I know my sister doesn't. I don't think she refers to herself. I just think everybody's on a continuum. And I think that the next generation, I mean, the millennials are much more open about exploring how they feel, because it's an option. So it occurs to them. It didn't occur to me. If I look back in my life, I'm like, I had a bit of a crush on that girl Esther at camp, didn't I? And oh my God, I totally had a crush on my 6th grade math teacher, and she looks a little bit like Pam now that I think about it. And I look back and I'm like, well, of course I had these things that I at the time thought of as admiration. They were sort of crushes, and I think that this generation gets to be more curious and explorative.
Yeah, I was very surprised by my kids sharing with me how many of their friends in high school were, in their words, bi. First of all, I was shocked as a parent how much sexual activity was going on in high school.
Yeah.
I don't remember that when I was in high school, although there were a couple of girls who were visibly pregnant. But I think A, I don't know if it was going on as much, or B, I was just not aware of it, obviously.
You were one busy girl, Donica.
Right, I was very busy, and probably very intentionally, with my parents putting me in so many activities. I didn't have time for those kind of activities.
Yeah.
But I think also we didn't talk about it. When I think about, back in college, I personally knew one person in college who was out about being gay. And the only reason I knew him is he was the one, doing the protests around, the main college building every day.
Yeah.
I didn't know anybody else who self-identified as gay.
Nobody talked about it. I remember being in one dorm in Blair one year, and there was a rumor that the girls downstairs were gay. And it was kind of like, ooh, but it was very different. Things have changed so fast. Things have changed so fast, I can't even believe it. I mean, just since Pam and I got together, the world has changed,
Right.
Well,
and using 9/11 as a pivot, it's such I just saw Come From Away on Broadway, which I highly recommend to everybody, about, which really dealt with how 9/11 really affected the lives of people in this whole town in Canada and everybody whose lives they touched. But I also read the book, which I highly recommend to you, The Light We Lost, which deals with a romance which began on 9/11.
Yeah.
And everybody can relate to things that they changed in their lives as a result.
Yeah.
I confess that I was kind of a workaholic traveler, and it was until then. And I was supposed to be at a meeting on a flight to Washington, D.C. from Newark, not the flight that went down. I was supposed to be on the flight that hour earlier. And my babysitter literally canceled the night before. And I had to cancel going to the meeting because it was just too late to call my mother and ask her to come.
Yeah.
And I remember taking my CV the next day and a red pen and just saying, okay, what can I resign from? And I just resigned from every activity that was not essential to my life.
Really? Right away? Like right after it happened?
Literally the next day.
Wow.
I just said, I just can't be doing this much traveling anymore. I need to be home.
That's happening all over the country. I mean, you think about that. It's just momentous.
Yeah, and it affects our relationships and who we love and who we spend our time with, because it reminds us about the fragility of time. And it reminds us about the importance of our time and how that you can't get back.
Yeah.
So anyway, what most people who are listening want to know about, and they're angry with me about, is that I didn't get more into the sex issue.
I know.
So I know that's what everybody wants to talk about.
It's actually I'm not sure that it's so interesting because it's all mechanics, right? I mean,
well, I think it gets to the issue of doing something entirely different.
Okay, so
we talked about the infidelity issue. So that was the first hurdle.
Okay, so
But how does it begin? First of all, was alcohol involved?
The first time we had sex? No.
Yes. So how do you overcome whatever barrier, or were there no barriers because you were on your crazy pills?
I would say that for me, the first time I had to stop in the middle. I had to stop, and because I got overwhelmed, and it was upsetting. You know, I got overwhelmed. I needed to stop. But then that never happened again. So I do remember that. It's not a strong memory that I had, but because most of it, I know, and it's funny that people are so curious about the sex. So I remember one time an old friend of ours saying to the two of us, "So who's the man?" And we were like, wow, there is no man. That's the point. You know? And one time this awful
and did you actually say that, or you just said that in your head?
I think I said it. I think I was a little PO'd.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was a little PO'd. Like, there doesn't, you know, the idea that it's inconceivable not to have there be a man if sex is occurring. I mean, it's crazy. But
I think people say that to gay male couples as well. Which one of
yes,
you is the
you're
man?
right.
Which is
It's
the
like,
woman?
oh, somebody has to be the aggressor in the relationship or something. So that was kind of eye-opening and made me think about the way people think about sex. And then I remember one time we were at dinner with an ex-in-law of Pam's, this much older guy who I wasn't overly fond of to begin with. And he got a little drunk at dinner, and he's crass anyway. And he started to say, "So what do you do? I mean, what do you do?" And I got really calm, and I just,
good for you.
and I said, "Now, so-and-so," he has a distinctive name too, so-and-so, "what do you imagine if you didn't have a penis? What would you and Lisa do?" Just go there for a little while, you know. It was like, what do you think? I don't know.
I would have been tempted to say, if your penis didn't work, or what did you start
Right.
doing when your penis stopped working?
Yeah, I should have, because he was older. I should have said something like that.
And drinking.
Like, if you forgot your Viagra one night, you know, and Lisa was hard up, what would you have done? You know.
I think a lot of people in those kind of relationships do nothing.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that's a whole nother topic. We actually got into it a little bit with a sex therapist, where there's actually a medical thing called a sexless marriage, which is defined as having sex fewer than 10 times a year. Which, when I first heard about that, I was like, seriously, that's a thing? Why would people stay married? Mm-hmm. But some people are very content.
Oh, I can totally imagine that. Think of all the older people who, you know, they're just content to be physically close without having sex, you know. And
it's not even just older people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in the day, or another thing that has certainly changed culturally, the New York Times had an article on this about 7 years ago when I was actually going through my divorce. Mm-hmm. And it talked about how a new thing, a fad, a trend, was people who had been married over 20 years getting divorced. Yeah, it used to be almost unheard of for people who had been married for a really long time to get divorced. It was usually that 7-year itch thing.
Oh, that's funny, because I think of that as being a classic time that people...
It is now.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, 20 years ago, you never heard of people who had been married over 20 years getting divorced. I think people just at that point decided, okay, I've invested so much time in this. We've learned to live together, and we'll just, you know, deal with it.
Yeah. 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 Well, I guess even 20 years ago, it wasn't a thing, because I could...
No, the New York Times reported it. I very clearly remember, because I was going through my divorce at the time, that this was a new trend that started about 7 or 8 years ago. So you're part of a trend.
I'm part of a trend. Yeah, because we were married 20 years when I told him I wanted to leave the marriage. Yeah, it was wild. It was wild. We were a small town scandal.
Did you stay in touch? Are you still friendly
with
your ex-husband?
Well, it wasn't friendly for a very, very long time. And I think that started to change not until 2011. When Pam and I left town and some things got settled out. And then I think the healing began to begin. And I give his new wife a lot of credit. He got married, I think within a few years of our divorce. Mm-hmm. Pam's husband got married right away. I mean, like the following year he got married. Oh,
really?
Yeah, very quickly.
Do you think he had been in a relationship before their divorce?
No, I don't think so. Because he told her when he met her. But they got engaged a couple months after their divorce was final.
Wow.
But yeah,
you should get each of the ex-husbands Vivian's book, The Straight Spouse.
I know. I thought of that, and I have regrets about, the ways in which I caused him pain, and I hope he's forgiven me. I was stupid in a lot of ways. I did some stupid things. I also felt a little desperate. And he did a lot of things, after the divorce and for which I feel like I had to forgive him. But I think it all started to heal much better in 2011. And I give his new wife a lot of credit. She's lovely. Mm-hmm. And she's been wonderful to my kids. And she makes things, she's one of those people who makes things easier wherever she is. So I'm very grateful to her. But it was a lot of years of ugly. I mean, I got divorced in 2003, and the healing didn't really start till 2011. That's only 7 years ago. Yeah. So it was not good. It was not good.
How did things work out with the kids? Yours and Pam's.
It's interesting. I think, there were two separate issues, right? They had the divorce, and then they had the moms who were gay in town.
At the same time.
Yeah, at the same time. So my kids guessed that I was having this relationship with Pam. My two middle kids did. My youngest was so little, Pam has always been around for as long as he can remember. My oldest son was really PO'd. He was angry, and it was a terrible time for him. He was a senior in college. He was oblivious because he was so engaged in his own life. He was about to leave home. Home was never going to be there when he came back because we moved. I mean, it was a terrible time. He was angry with me for a few years. He had the hardest time as far as that goes. Divorce hurts children in certain ways. It gifts them in other ways. The gay thing, I think my kids took to it a little more easily than Pam's. Her kids were a little younger, and her kids were a little younger, and I think they were a little more susceptible to the social pressure of it. And my kids kind of dug their heels in a little bit about that kind of thing. But I'm sure it hurt. Julia told me one time, my daughter, that she got in somebody's car and they were kind of peppering her with questions about me. And she knew very well, and that happened in this small town. My hairdresser told me one time, oh, so-and-so came in. Do you know them? They were asking a lot of questions about you and you being gay, yada, yada. It was a small town. It was awkward for a long time. So Pam and I would be like, okay, we ran out of milk. Okay, I'll put the lipstick on and go down to Stop and Shop. Because you felt like you had to look good too. You couldn't go down and look schlumpy because then somebody would call you a dykey lesbian. You know what I mean?
You always look good.
But you know what I mean? That there was this way in which you didn't want to give anybody any ammunition to criticize you, other than what they're already criticizing you for. And
so you talked about Pam's, the reaction of Pam's ex-relative, the drunk guy. What are some of the other kind of examples that stick out in your mind about the things people said to you in the aftermath of this?
Some people were absolutely wonderful. I lost a ton of friends in the divorce.
And that happens with any divorce.
I lost.
I think people choose what side they're going to be on.
Right. Absolutely. And it was a lot easier to be with the person on the conventional side than it would have been to be with me. On the other hand, people came out of the woodwork, you know, which was wonderful. So I reconnected with a bunch of old friends, which was really nice. So I think that's something that is so hard on people when you're in the middle of it. You don't know that, you know, you can feel so betrayed, so abandoned. But that's divorce, you know. It was hard. My family was really angry with me. My sister was angry with me for a while. That was painful. My parents were furious at me for a long time. You know, I felt like I was putting my kids through something horrible. And yet I just kept putting one foot in front of the other because it was so important to me to be with this person. And, you know, if I look back on it, I think, was I just totally selfish? You know,
love can be selfish.
Yeah.
Love wants what it wants.
Yeah.
You know, when it wants.
What it wants. But, you know, I didn't give it up for nothing. I didn't give it all up for nothing, because here we are 17 years later and we are still together and we have something pretty terrific. So,
well, you're still together and you still have great relationships with all your children.
Yes.
And you restored things with your mother before she passed.
Oh yeah.
And how are things with the rest of your family? And you're even having healing with your ex-husband.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was the last thing to happen. I mean, my family, my extended family is very liberal. So, I mean, I brought Pam to a wedding, like about a year after we'd gotten together, and introduced her to my entire extended family. And my sisters thought I was absolutely crazy, but Pam was willing to do it, and everybody was lovely to her.
Pam, the introvert, was willing to do this. And you said you wouldn't be able to get her out of the car. You got her to go to a wedding and to meet. You brought her to your 25th college reunion.
Yes.
Now, what was the dynamic about that? Because I know, you know, what's interesting to me, when I think about my reaction, I don't know what kind of headspace I was in at the time, but I think I was just like, okay. I don't, you know,
friends didn't really give a hoot.
I think what was interesting too, in my own, you know, what's interesting is I thought this conversation was going to be about, for lack of any more graceful term, the gay thing or the gay transition thing. But it's really more of a conversation about divorce.
Yeah.
And it's really more of a conversation about leaving, you know, one lily pad that's very comfortable and jumping to a place in the pond where you're not really sure there's another lily pad. So I think I'm hearing so many more similarities in our conversation between what I went through with my divorce, even though in my case, there were no other parties at all, let alone anybody, you know, becoming gay.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I'm hearing you say about reconnecting with people from your past is I noticed that I deliberately sought out those reconnections after I got divorced with people who I knew before I was married.
Yeah.
And part of that is because I think I wanted to get back to who I was before then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wanted to be with people who saw me the way I was before I was married.
Exactly. I totally get that. And that was, you know, because you become your story. And we couldn't wait to move out of Wilton, Connecticut. I mean, for a lot of years, the two ex-husbands and we, with the two new wives, were all six of us in Wilton, running into each other and knowing mutual people. And we were our story. Horrible thing happened to my ex-husband one time at a party, and the kids told me because they thought it would be funny. It is funny, and he was good about it. Somebody came up to him at a party and he said something about he'd just gotten divorced or something or other, and he said to my ex, but I just heard a story about some guy in town whose wife left him for a woman. And
oops.
And my ex said, that would be me.
Oh, he did. Well, he owned up to it.
To his credit. He said, that would be me.
Well, it was also Pam's ex too. It was two
Yeah, it was
guys.
Pam's ex, and there was actually another couple of women who met each other at their nursery school, and about 2 years before Pam and I got together, they'd gotten to get together and also caused a huge small town scandal with, and they had 5 kids between them. We had 6.
Mm-hmm.
But so, I mean, this is happening all over the place, I'm sure,
Well, one of the other things I noticed when I got divorced was people started coming out of the woodwork. People I've been good friends with for over 20 years telling me about their divorces, which predated my knowing them, that I didn't even know that they had. And I kept hearing about these stories where people, part of the issue with divorce is that somebody was gay, or somebody acknowledged their gay feelings, or just fell in love with somebody who happened to be gay.
Yeah.
But there were many more stories where the divorce was precipitated by somebody who realized they were straight and had feelings for another straight person.
Yeah,
so infidelity is a very common reason for divorce. Interestingly, it's not the number one reason. The number one reason for divorce is financial disagreements and financial difficulties, which I always thought was interesting because divorce creates more financial difficulties.
Well, I'll tell you one thing though, and this is something that, as far as the fidelity thing, I think the infidelity thing happens because there are problems in the marriage. Mm-hmm. Because when you're happy, you're not looking. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you too, that if Pam had been a man and I would have recognized the signals, the feelings, I would have understood what I was dealing with, and I might have been able to protect myself in that situation.
And if she had been a man, you wouldn't have gone to Asia with her for 2
years. Right.
In the middle of everything. Let's be very clear about that.
Exactly. You don't have those.
You wouldn't have put yourself in those situations.
For intensity, yeah. But I would have been like, oh, danger, stay away from that person, too compelling, and also, what does that mean? But I think fidelity is because there are other problems in the marriage. If you're happy, you're not really looking unless something's really in your face. I guess if something's really in your face.
Yeah. Or unless there's another hole. So the number 2 reason for divorce is actually complications and things related with children.
Oh, I bet.
So,
I bet.
And number 3 would be infidelity.
Yeah.
So what's the weirdest thing that people ever said to you about, or somebody ever said to you about your current situation?
The weirdest thing. Well, the weirdest thing. Oh, it's I don't know that there's any one weird thing. There's any one weird thing. There was sort of death by 1,000 cuts. So in terms of there were little things that I remember, like my stepdaughter being in the school play, and there was a mother who happened to be an incredibly conservative minister, and we knew about her. She had pulled her daughter out of Pam's Girl Scout troop when she found out Pam was gay.
Aye.
That stunk. So we knew about her. So Emily was in this play, and the minister's daughter was in the play, and the minister was part of a group of the moms doing makeup, and she made a point to say to Emily, let me help you with your makeup because you probably don't learn about that at home. That kind of thing. That's the kind of thing our kids were putting up. I mean, much more crapo from adults,
mm-hmm.
And their purient curiosity than their peers, really.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. I'll probably, honestly, because a lot of time's passed, I feel like I've had a lot of healing. I mean, we moved here and it was such a relief to just be Pam and Martha,
mm-hmm.
I can't tell you, after all those years living in that fishbowl, it was such a relief. We happen to live in a really diverse neighborhood too, which is nice. But when you asked me to do this, I sort of thought, God, at this point, I sort of feel like it's the most boring part about me. I mean, we're just another middle-aged couple who says, will you take out the garbage and, you want swordfish tonight?
Actually, that's what you should have said when the person said, which one is the man? You should have said, do you mean which one nags the other one about taking out the trash?
yeah. He's stuck with it. Yeah, he's stuck with it. Whatever.
I actually was talking to one friend of mine who was going through a divorce, and she was like a year ahead of me in the process. And I was like sort of getting advice from her.
Yeah.
And she said, at first she was so overwhelmed about like, how was she going to handle all the things that her husband had handled and being a single mom. And she said, and then I realized it's not that difficult to take out the trash. So what advice would you give to women in a transitional situation, whether the transition is dealing with the first time having feelings for another woman or dealing with getting involved in a long-term single-sex relationship?
Well, the advice obviously it depends on your situation. I was married, so that complicated my, I love being in a same-sex relationship, and I think it suits me because I think my poor ex-husband was probably not capable of the amount of emotional intensity I appreciate in a relationship. I just don't think he was wired that way. And that's something I needed. That's not his fault. Mm-hmm. So there are differences in I think the differences that I notice in a same-sex relationship is that at least women, I don't know how it is for men, women are a little bit more protective of one another as far as the way they talk about one another to their friends. So you'll hear women say, oh, Bert was such a jerk last night. He left his, he did this and he did that. And, he's so
I know you were going to say he left his underwear on the floor.
That type of thing. But there's that way that heterosexual people talk about one another to others. And gay women, people in a same-sex relationship, I think they're much more protective, and I'm not 100% sure why, but I notice it with myself, and I notice it's like there's something in the culture that allows you to talk about your husband or your wife in that kind of dismissive way. You see it on television.
It's almost expected.
It's almost expected. It's almost like it's a way of letting off steam. It's like, oh, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, isn't marriage hard? And I think maybe it's because the relationships are harder won. So you don't feel like, I'm not quite sure, but that's one.
I think it is so highly, obviously I'm not remarried, but in a long-term committed relationship with a man who I have never heard one time ever say anything in any way disparaging about me or our relationship, which is so nice.
To somebody else.
And even in a one-on-one situation, just very respectful.
Yeah.
And I've often said, I never knew that being in a relationship could be this easy. So maybe it starts with that kind of respectful attitude towards each other, or not putting down the person you say you're in love with.
Right. Because I'm not even talking about the way you talk to each other, because that's...
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been involved in a lot of those bitch fests.
Yeah. And women don't do that. It doesn't feel safe to do that. And I think the other thing that we noticed, we don't think about it very much anymore because we've been together so long, but one of the things we noticed at the beginning was that all the roles are up for grabs. There is no expectation that somebody gets the broccoli out of the drain board and somebody takes the trash out. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, there were a lot of things that I remember my husband leaving for me to do, little gross crud jobs, and there were things I left for him to do. And that's all negotiable in a same-sex relationship. You tend to do the things that you like to do, and you do what the other person doesn't like to do or something, or what you're physically capable of doing, but it's all up for grabs. And that's kind of freeing. It was awkward at first. I mean, it was funny when we first lived together. It was like, the towels got washed like every 3 days. And it was like, we finally realized we were both being responsible for washing the towels. And we were like, I just washed the towels. Well, I didn't know that, you know? And like, so it was just funny, you know, it was just funny.
So I noticed you're talking with your hands a little bit, and I noticed your beautiful diamond ring. So is that a stereotype too? Are you both wearing beautiful diamond rings? Or how does that work?
We're both jewelry girls. And when we, so this is a commitment ring. When years after we got divorced, we gave each other kind of commitment rings. And then we got married in 2016. And we'd always talked about getting married, but we didn't want to do it until it was federal. We didn't want to do it. And then, you know, we were at, it was so impulsive. It was ridiculous. We were at the gem and jewelry show in Tucson for work. And we walked in and there are diamond places all over the place. And it was first thing in the morning, and we just sauntered right over to the diamond place and started trying on diamond rings. And all of a sudden it started to become real. And we looked at each other and we said, does this mean if we do this, it means we're getting married, right? I mean, that's literally how it started. Crazy. And then, and we got married in Provincetown. One of our best friends married us, and her husband was witness, and it was very romantic and just
He agrees.
Yeah, just mercy, hush. Thank you. Better. It was very romantic. It was wonderful. And we had wedding cake and a photographer, and we got wedding dresses, and I mean, you know, mature woman wedding dresses.
Well, I think that's the other issue too about this whole conversation that we hinted at a few times, but didn't really also address, is the impact of just being older and wiser.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
The second time, and coming into this relationship with all of the experience that you then had from your previous marriage.
I got married 3 or 4 weeks after I graduated from college. I mean, I was a baby. I met my ex when I was 18, about to turn 19.
I remember.
Yeah, what the heck did I know about anything or what I needed, or, you know, and we had a good go of it in a lot of ways, but you're so young, you don't know who you are yet. I mean, it's remarkable to think that I did that and that my parents let me, but they wouldn't have been able to stop me, you know,
because those were crazy pills of a different kind.
Those were crazy pills of a different kind, and boy, did I want to have children, you know.
And boy, did you.
Boy, did I. Lady, give it a rest.
Anyway, Martha, I could talk to you all day, but we have to let people get back to work and get out of their cars. They're probably sitting in the driveway still listening to the end of this podcast. Is there anything that I should have asked you but didn't, or that you wanted to say desperately to the people who are listening to this?
The only thing that I really wanted to get across was if we could just get over the labels. You know, it's like, don't ask somebody, so when did you turn gay? Or, you know, when did you know you were gay? And it's like, well, I never, you know, I just think people are fluid, and we have to allow room for that and not label everybody, you know. So
I think that's a great note to end on. It's just like every other topic where it just all depends on everything.
Boy, that wraps it up.
That's my answer to any question about parenting, menopause, birth control, pregnancy, you name it. That's my answer. It all depends on everything.
My answer is you will outgrow that problem before you solve it, most likely. And that is very helpful.
Well, I hope you and Pam both live to outgrow this problem.
No problem. No problem. What problem?
No, the problem of people asking you.
Oh, yeah.
Like, all of these really super annoying questions. And I guess if they didn't ask you super annoying questions about this, they would be asking you super annoying questions about other things.
Yeah.
You know, one of my favorite responses to people who ask me something ridiculous my new answer is I love to say, do you realize you just said that out loud? Or another answer another question answer I came up with when somebody said something really ridiculous to me on a blind date once is I said, what is it that you know about me that makes you think it's okay to say that? As I got up and put on my coat and left.
Oh man, good for you.
But my favorite is, do you realize you just said that out
loud?
and maybe we need to add that come back to our national discourse on a lot of different topics.
Oh man.
But we won't get started on that.
We'll just go there.
We'll stick to, use your common sense, use your manners, and that whole golden rule thing about doing unto others as you would have them do unto you.
That goes a long way.
Anyway, thank you so much. I think you enlightened a lot of people, gave people a lot of things to talk about. And next time we'll have you come talk about something boring like headaches.
All right. Lots of love.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.